Good evening. I want to talk to you just for a moment about a couple passages in the book of Acts that have to do with the Judgment Day and our accountability. Uh, Long ago, there was a senator named Daniel Webster, actually served in the Senate from 1827 to 1841, a known orator. Uh, he was asked a question: what is the most solemn, sacred, serious thought that you have entertained? And he answered, the most serious proposition that ever challenged my attention is the thought that I must appear before the God of my being and give account of the deeds that I do while in the body, whether they are good or bad. That sounds like Romans 14:12 to me, doesn't it, you? Each of us going to have to give an account of ourselves. Nancy's not going to give an account for the deeds that I've done on this earth. My parents are not going to give an account for the deeds that I've done on this earth. The elders are not going to give an account for the deeds I've done on this earth. I'm going to have to stand alone before God. And I'm going to have to give an account for my own deeds. I'm thinking particularly about the account involving Felix in Acts chapter 24. We know that the Apostle Paul was arrested while in the temple in Acts chapter 21. As much as anything else, really being charged of insurrection, which he was not guilty of, among other things that he was charged of or charged for. And so Paul finds himself defending himself at first, and as it relates to his own defense to the Felix, a provincial governor, who brings his wife Drusilla in Acts chapter 24. And there it is said that Paul reasoned with Felix in Acts 24:25, and as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment. Felix was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." We're not left to wonder about what it is that the Apostle Paul had to say to Felix. We know what he had to say to him. He reasoned with him about the judgment. And we talked to him about righteousness and self-control too, both which will have a lot to do with where we spend eternity. But whatever it is that Paul had to say to Felix about his conduct and about the coming judgment, it alarmed Felix. It scared him. It says in the King James that he trembled. The American Standard Version says he was terrified. Other translations say he was afraid. English Standard Version, of course, says he was alarmed. So if we're not right with God, that's what we ought to be. We ought to be alarmed, trembling, terrified, afraid. And each of us, as we are thinking about judgment and whether or not we're right with God, should, as Webster would say, take it seriously. It's a somber thing, important thing. And then I think about another occasion in Acts, earlier actually, in Acts chapter 17, in a passage well known to us, where Paul appears in Athens, and he's preaching to them from Areopagus, and he's in the midst of it, and he's getting on to them pretty good about their worshiping of unknown gods. And as Paul talks to them about this, in verse 31, it says about judgment, he says, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world. And I would say to you that that day that's been fixed by God, although it'll come as a thief as a night, is a somber, serious moment for Ross. And I want to make sure that I'm right with God. And he will judge the world in righteousness, the scripture tells us. And then the text ends really in verse 32 when Paul says, "Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, we will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed. So you see three things happening there, really, when the scripture is being revealed, or when the truth is being revealed by Paul to them, and he's gotten on to them pretty good about some things, that some mocked him. And that's going to be the reaction of some people regarding truth and how we approach it and our insistence on obeying God. Some people are going to mock us for that. And as Paul was preaching, some mocked him for the words in which he spoke. Verse 32 tells us that. On the latter part of that verse, it says, others put him off. He said, we'll hear thee again about this. Then like Felix, in what he said to Paul, that he would call on him in a more convenient time, a better, more opportune time. No evidence whatsoever that Felix ever obeyed the gospel. If he did, Scripture doesn't tell us that. He or his wife, Priscilla. So some mocked, verse 32a. Some procrastinated, verse 32b. And then thirdly, some then joined him and believed. And that's the way it's going to be as people listen to the truth in which is being preached. And the appeal today, as you look at your own life, you look at yourself, that you'll do as Daniel Webster said and take the judgment seriously. Let it be a somber thing to you, that you introspect, examine yourself, Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5, whether you be in the faith. Prove it to yourself. Look at your life. Look at where you are in your relationship with God. Be honest about it. Be thorough. Let it be a continuous examination. And then after you've seen yourself for who you are, realize that God's going to look at your own life, and all things are naked before him, the Hebrew writer tells us. So he's not going to be deceived by our actions. We're not going to be able to talk him into things at that point in time in our life. May it be that each one of us have lived our life in such a way as that he will say, enter in, faithful servant. I bid you good night.